Hello students, today we will discuss about engine components. Okay, so first of all let us know few things about the engine. So the heat engine is mainly divided into two groups, that is external combustion engine and internal combustion engine. So heat engine is mainly divided, so that is external combustion engine and internal combustion engine. So in case of external combustion engine, the combustion or the burning of the fuel takes place outside the engine, as in case of these steam engines and turbines. So these turbines and steam engines were used in old days in railway system. So here combustion takes place outside the combustion chamber. So example is old days railways. So in olden days in railway system, these external combustion engines were used, which were steam engines and turbines. Okay. But in internal combustion engine, the combustion of the fuel takes place in presence of air inside the cylinder, and the products of combustion directly act on the piston to develop the power. So here combustion takes place inside the cylinder in presence of air. Okay. And products of these internal combustion act on piston to produce the power. So internal combustion engines are further classified as petrol, diesel and gas engine according to the type of fuel used. So these are petrol engines, then diesel engines and gas engines based on type of fuel. So these engines are commonly used, that is the internal combustion engines are commonly used in road vehicles, locomotives and even in industrial applications. So they are used in road vehicles, then locomotives and industrial applications. Okay, so this is about the brief introduction of the engines. Now we will see the components of engine. So components of IC engines. So here This figure shows a 4-stroke petrol engine. 4-stroke petrol engine. And so you can see the different types of different components of this engine. So here there is a crankcase. Okay, then there is a cam. Okay, inlet cam and the exhaust cam. Here there is a connecting rod. There is a crank. Okay, then there are cooling fins provided. Okay, this is the cylinder. There is an exhaust. Okay, so silencer is connected to the exhaust. Then there is a exhaust valve. Then there is inlet manifold. There is a venturi. You can see there is a petrol tank and a carburetor. This is the petrol pipe. And here there is a space for air inlet. Okay, this is a rocker arm which is provided. Okay, so these are different components of the petrol engine. We will see the components of diesel engine also. So here some important components of diesel engine which we will study are the cylinder. So here you can see this is the cylinder and there is a lining on it. Okay, then the cylinder head. So here there is a cylinder head. Okay, so this portion. Okay, then there is piston and piston rings. Okay, then there is a connecting rod. So you can see this is the connecting rod. Okay, this long portion. Okay, this one is called the connecting rod. Okay, then this is the piston. Okay, which is present inside the cylinder. So this portion is called as the piston. Okay, this piston also consists of the piston rings. Then there is crank and crankshaft. Then there is piston pin. So this is the crankshaft. There is a crankcase. There is a crank pin. Okay, so crank pin bolt. Okay, all these come under the crank and the crankshaft. Then there is a piston pin also. So which is not shown in the figure. Okay, but the piston consists of a piston pin also. Okay, then there is inlet and exhaust valve. So these components are common in both petrol and diesel engine. So this is the inlet valve. Okay, so from here the fuel will enter, and this is the exhaust valve from where the fuel, that is the products of combustion, flow out. Then there is inlet and exhaust manifold also. So here you can see there is an inlet manifold and exhaust manifold. Okay, we will study the function of them in detail. Then there is cam and camshaft. So this is the camshaft. Okay, this portion is called as the camshaft. Then there is a camshaft drive here. Okay. Then the crankcase, then water jacket. So water jacket is provided for the cooling purpose. Okay, then flywheel, then there is a governor and carburetor and spark plug. So here these things are present in the petrol engine. So this is the carburetor, okay, and they haven't mentioned the spark plug, okay. Then so this is the crankcase which we have seen. So this crankcase, okay. Then there is carburetor and spark plug, and there is fuel pump and nozzle. So these are few components of the IC engine which are important. So here there is fuel pump and nozzle. Okay. So we will study all these components one by one. First we are going to study the cylinder. So the cylinder is the main body of the engine in which the piston reciprocates and develops power. So inside this cylinder the piston will reciprocate, that is it will move up and down. Okay. So this is the main body of the engine. It is the main body of the engine in which piston reciprocates to develop power. So this piston is generally made up of cast iron, but in case of heavy duty engine, alloy cast irons can also be used. So made up of cast iron in heavy duty engines can be made of alloy cast iron also. Okay. Then liners are generally inserted in the cylinder which can be replaced when worn out. So because the piston is moving inside the cylinder, the liners are provided inside the cylinder like this. Okay. So on either side liners will be provided, and because of wearing out, as the piston keeps moving, if due to friction or something, if they get worn out, then we can replace them. So liners are provided into the cylinders which can be replaced if worn out. So these liners are made up of cast iron or alloy cast iron. So liners can be made of cast iron or alloy cast iron. The next component is the cylinder head. So second component. So cylinder head, it closes one end of the cylinder. It houses the inlet and exhaust valve through which the charge is taken inside the cylinder and the burnt gases are exhausted to the atmosphere from the cylinder. So here it will close one end of the cylinder. Okay, this portion is called as the cylinder head, and this head consists of, so here, inlet and the exhaust valves. So here inlet valve and there is a exhaust valve here, so that the fuel will get inside the cylinder through this inlet valve and the exhaust gases will flow out through the exhaust valve to the atmosphere. So it closes one end of the cylinder. It houses, that is, it consists of inlet and exhaust valve through which the charge is taken inside, that is the air and fuel mixture is called as the charge inside the cylinder, and exhaust gases flow out to the atmosphere from the cylinder. So cylinder head is usually cast as one piece and it is bolted to the top of the cylinder. It is made up of cast iron. So it is casted as one piece and is bolted to the top of the cylinder and made of cast iron. Okay, the third component is the piston and piston rings. So here we can see this is the piston. Okay, the function of the piston is to compress the charge during the compression stroke and transmit the gas or force to the gas force to the crank through the connecting rod during the power stroke. So what does this piston do? It reciprocates inside the cylinder and during the compression stroke it will compress the charge. Okay, and it will transmit the gas force to the crank through the connecting rod during the power stroke. Functions of the piston are to compress the charge during compression stroke and transmit the gas force to the crank through the connecting rod during power stroke. So this is usually made up of aluminium alloy. Made up of aluminium. Okay. Now the piston components are housed in circumferential grooves provided on the outer surface of the piston. So the piston rings are housed in the circumferential grooves provided on the outer surface of the piston. So if this is the piston, there are grooves provided here on the outer surface. So all the circle, okay, that is the circumferential portion of this piston are provided with grooves in which these piston rings are housed or they are kept. So this will give gas tight fitting between the piston and the cylinder. So why these piston rings are provided? Because they give gas tight, that is there will be no leakage of gas fitting between the piston and cylinder, okay, and prevent the leakage of high pressure gases. Okay, they prevent the leakage of high pressure gases. So they are made up of, piston rings are made up of special cast iron. Made up of special cast iron. Okay. The next component is the connecting rod. The fourth component is the connecting rod. So the connecting rod's function is to transmit the reciprocating motion of the piston into rotary motion of the crank. So here this is the connecting rod which is shown in the figure. So here there is a piston connected here. So the reciprocating motion, so piston moves up and down, right? So this motion, that is the reciprocating motion of the piston, is converted or it is transmitted to the crank with the help of this connecting rod. So as it transmits the reciprocating motion, it will convert it into rotary motion of the crank. So this is the crank which is shown here, and there is a crank pin also shown in the figure. So connecting rod function is to transmit reciprocating motion of the piston into rotary motion of the crank. Its small end, that is the connecting rod's small end, form a pin joint with the piston, and the big end is connected to the crank by the crank pin. So the small end, so you can see this is the small end, it is connected to the piston, with the help of piston pin. Okay, piston joint or pin joint with the help of a pin joint and the large end. Okay, so here this is the small end because the diameter is small here, and the larger end is connected to the crank through the crank pin. So you can see this is the crank pin. So the large end of the connecting rod is connected to the crank with the help of this crank pin. The small end of connecting rod is or forms a pin joint with the piston, and the big end is connected to the crank by crank pin. So this connecting rod is usually made up of high quality steel by forging. So made up of high quality steel by forging. The next component is the crank and the crankshaft. Fifth component, crank and crankshaft. So both the crank and crankshaft are made from steel forging. So made of steel forging. The crank is supported in the main bearings. So the crank is supported in the main bearings. The power from the engine is taken from the crankshaft only. So the power from the engine is taken by the crankshaft only. The next component is the piston pin. So as discussed, this pin that is forming a piston is forming a pin joint with a connecting rod. So that pin is called as the piston pin. So this piston pin connects the small end of the connecting rod to the piston. So it connects the small end of the piston rod, of the connecting rod to the piston. So this piston pin is also called as the Gudgeon pin, also known as Gudgeon pin. Okay. The next component is the inlet and exhaust manifold. Inlet and exhaust manifold. So the inlet manifold is the passage for carrying the charge to the engine. So as the name indicates, it will carry the charge to the engine. So this is a passage. Inlet manifold is the passage for carrying the charge to the engine. So this manifold consists of the air filter to remove dust and dirt from the charge. Okay, it consists of, that is the inlet manifold consists of air filter to remove dirt and dust from the engine. That is, it will clear the charge before entering into the engine. Now, the exhaust manifold is the passage for carrying the exhaust gases from the engine to the atmosphere. For carrying the exhaust gases from the engine to the atmosphere. Okay. So this exhaust manifold consists of a silencer so as to reduce the noise of the exhaust gases to a tolerable level. So why the silencer is provided? As the name indicates, it will reduce the noise of the exhaust gases to a tolerable level. And the next component is the inlet and exhaust valves. So these valves control the admission and the removal of gases from the engine cylinder. So the inlet valve controls the admission of charge and exhaust valve controls the removal of gases from the cylinder, from the engine cylinder of engine. The next component is the cam and camshaft. So the function of the, so here in the figure you can see this is the cam, the circular portion, okay, and the portion inside the circle is, so actually it is a shaft but we are showing the cross section, so this is a camshaft. Okay, so the function of the camshaft is to operate inlet and the exhaust valve through the cam follower and the rocker arm. So here you can see this is the rocker arm. So the function of the cam camshaft. Okay, the function of the camshaft is to operate that. It will operate the inlet and the exhaust valve, okay, through cams, through this cam, through the cam follower and the rocker arm. So function is to operate inlet and exhaust valve through cam, cam followers and rocker arm. So the camshaft is driven by the crankshaft at half the speed of crankshaft in four-stroke engines. So this camshaft is driven by crankshaft at half the speed of the crankshaft in four-stroke engines. So if the speed of the crankshaft is 4, then it will drive the or it will move the camshaft by speed 2. So that is half the distance of the crankshaft. So the cam is made up of required profile to give desired motion of the valve. So cam can be made up of circular shape or circular profile or elliptical or oval based on the type of motion we require for the valve. So is made of required profile to give desired motion to the valve. The next component is the crank case. So this crankcase serves as a sump for the lubricating oil, which is used for lubricating the engine parts, and it also provides support for the crank shaft. So crankcase is a outer lining which is present on the crankshaft. So this will act as a sump, that is it will contain the lubricating oils in it, which those oils are used to lubricate the engine parts. And not only lubricating oils it contains, but also it will provide support to the crank shaft. So it serves as a sump for lubricating oils which are used for lubricating the engine parts, and it also provides support for the crankshaft. Okay, the next component is the water jacket. So we were discussing about one more component, that is the water jacket. So this water jacket is provided around the cylinder of the engine for cooling purpose. So function is to cool the cylinder surroundings. So it is provided around the cylinder for cooling purpose. So air cooling is used for small engines, and fins are provided for increasing the heat transfer rates. So water jacket is not required when the engine is air cooled. So air cooling is used for small capacity engines, and fins are provided in air cooling system. Fins are provided for better heat transfer or to increase the heat transfer rate. Okay. Then water jacket is not required when the engine is air cooled. The next component is the flywheel. So this is a wheel which is mounted on the crankshaft, which will store the excess energy during the power stroke, and it returns the energy during the other strokes to maintain fairly constant output torque on the crankshaft. So what is the main function? To store the energy. So flywheel is a wheel. It is a wheel mounted on the crankshaft. Okay. Function is it stores the excess energy during power stroke and returns this stored energy during the other strokes. So by this, that is by storing the energy, what it is doing, it maintains a fairly constant output torque on the crankshaft. So this is the function of the flywheel. The next component is the governor. So this is driven from the crankshaft. So it is driven from the crankshaft. Okay. So the function of the governor is to maintain speed of the engine constant irrespective of the load on the engine. So function of the governor is to maintain speed of the engine constant irrespective of the load on the engine. So how does it do that function? So how does it carry out this function? So this is done by regulating the charge to the petrol engine and fuel in case of the diesel engine. So it carries out this function, that is maintaining the speed by regulating the charge to the petrol engine and fuel in case of diesel engine. So governor maintains the speed by regulating the charge and the fuel in case of petrol and diesel engine respectively. The next component is the carburetor and spark plug. So these two components are used only in the petrol engine. So present only in petrol engine. Okay. The function of the carburetor is to supply uniform air fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. So function of carburetor is to supply uniform air fuel mixture. Carburetor is to supply uniform air fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. Then the function of the spark plug is to initiate the combustion at the completion of the compression stroke. So spark plug function is to initiate, that is it will start the combustion. Initiate the combustion at the end of compression stroke. So as the compression stroke gets completed, then the spark plug has to initiate the combustion of the fuel. So it is generally present in the cylinder head. So it is present at the cylinder head. Okay. Then the last component is the fuel pump and nozzle. So these two components are used in diesel engine. So used in diesel engine. Okay. So the function of the fuel pump is to force the fuel oil at a very high pressure into the cylinder at the end of compression stroke through the nozzle. So what does the fuel pump do? So this is the fuel injecting pump. So what it does is it will push the fuel into the nozzle at very high pressure into the engine cylinder at the completion of compression stroke through the nozzle. So here this is a nozzle, okay, and this is the fuel injecting pump. So this pump will send a very high pressure fuel through the nozzle into the engine cylinder at the end of the compression stroke. So function of fuel pump is to force the fuel at a very high pressure into the engine cylinder at the end of compression stroke through the nozzle. Now, what is the function of the nozzle? The function of the nozzle is to break up the oil into fine spray into the engine cylinder at the end of the compression stroke. So, what the nozzle does? It will break the oil into spray. Okay, high pressure fuel is sent into the nozzle by the fuel pump, where the nozzle will break these oil particles, that is the fuel particles, into spray. So the function of the nozzle is to break the fuel into fine spray at the end of compression stroke. So this is all about the engine components. I hope you have understood the topic. Thank you.